Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our concluding luncheon of the Fall Faculty Luncheon Series, which is entitled Unity and Diversity, an Academic Community Reflects on the Three Cultures, the Humanities, Social Sciences, and Natural Sciences. Today's luncheon will feature a panel discussion on the topic of implementing a three-culture dialogue at Florida State University. We will utilize a PowerPoint presentation to organize the discussion into several segments. First, the concept of three cultures, humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, residing within the larger university. Secondly, different approaches that can be used to promote scholarly interactions among the three cultures. Thirdly, a discussion of opportunities for cross-cultural contributions. And finally, the ideas and strategies for implementing the cross-cultural interactions at Florida State University. At appropriate points throughout the session, we will welcome input from all of you. If you wish to comment or ask a question, please step to one of the two microphones. There's one here and one down to the left of the panelists there. Step to that microphone, please, to ask your question or make your comment. And those microphones send the audio to the TV and webcast operation, and they also will amplify your voice in the room, so there should be no difficulty for all of us to hear you. And so with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. And from left to right, from your left to your right, we have Dr. Megan Kennedy from English, clearly representing the humanities. Dr. Joseph Gabriel from Medical Humanities and Social Sciences at the College of Medicine. And this is my own definition, but I place Joe at the interface between the humanities and the social sciences. You might not agree with that, but that's my idea. The next in line is Dr. Pam Keel, a professor in the psychology department, who I'm designating as at the interface between social sciences and natural sciences. And finally, all the way to your right is Dr. Tom Miller, professor from biological sciences, who's clearly within the natural sciences. So as you go from left to right across the panelists, we go from humanities through the social sciences, and then on your right, we end up in the natural sciences. So that's the way this is set up. And I'm the moderator, of course, and I'm in the Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. Okay, so let's start out with our first slide here, if we can get this to work. Our first speaker, Dr. Jay Clayton, who's a professor of English at Vanderbilt University, made a rather strong statement in his talk. He said, E.O. Wilson's concept of consilience, describing a grand new synthesis of the disciplines, represents a utopia that is doomed to failure. No amount of lamenting the old integrated culture will bring that world back. In fact, none of our three speakers called for a grand new synthesis of the disciplines or certainly of the cultures. So at this point in the discussion, we're looking at the humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences as being distinct, having key differences one to the other. This focus on three cultures within a university highlights differences among the disciplines at the expense of recognizing obvious overlap. So I'll ask the first question to our panelists. In what sense do you see these three areas as being distinct or different, and what might be the basis for defining them as separate cultures? Are they really separate cultures in your view, and how might we define those separate cultures if you do indeed see them as separate? So our plan is to just let any panelist who wishes to comment begin.
Yes. Well, Well, so hi everybody, thanks for coming out. I'm a historian by training, and historians use a lot of different methods. And we're kind of humanities, and parts of our discipline are kind of in the social sciences. So, even within the humanities, where history is typically located, people typically say it's in the humanities. Even within the humanities, there's different methodological approaches, and there's significant disagreements among methodologies and kind of views about what we want to be doing, right? So in my work, I'm trying to move towards a more kind of work that has kind of direct applied implications in today's world, in terms of like thinking about how to have history contribute to designing medical interventions, for example. But that's not the kind of work that a lot of scholars or historians want to be doing. And so, there are real differences of opinions, methodologies, even within the humanities. I think there are significant differences between the humanities and the natural sciences in terms of methods, obviously, but also in terms of kind of general outlooks about what we want to be doing. And that's a very vague answer.
I might just add, so the kinds of differences, Joe, that you're talking about, and I would agree, are methodological differences, obviously. And clearly there certainly are such differences even within a single discipline. But I think there also are important differences in funding structure between the humanities, the social sciences, and the sciences. Whereas in the sciences and social sciences, much of the funding structure comes through grants, and much less so in humanities, which sometimes also are called upon to, I guess, provide a kind of service to the rest of the university in training students to read and write and do those basic things. Of course, math, foreign language also are some of those service departments. But so methodology and also funding, I guess I wanted to say.
Sorry, I'm totally
Oh, sure.
Can you
Sure, sorry.
try that again?
Yeah.
See if it-
All right, so
Is that working?
Well, then we'd have to
essentially Joe's talking about methodological differences, and I'm saying yes, but also funding differences.
So I think some of the methodological differences also may be linked into some philosophical differences about how we approach questions to the world around us. I would say that in the natural sciences, and Tom, you can absolutely disagree with me on this, but I'd say in the natural sciences, there's a general understanding that there is a truth out there, and that through empirical approaches, we can get closer to understanding what is true and what is not true, that there are methods by which you say this is evidence, and now we don't have evidence for this, so we don't accept this as a fact. And I would say more in the humanities, there's an understanding of the construction of reality, and that the idea that truth is something that is to some extent a human creation. And I would say that those represent that represents a real point of departure that then would contribute to methodological differences.
And so this is the basis for the science wars, right? This is this difference in the. Well, so there's this difference in a lot of scientists have this view that there really is this kind of truth out there, that the world works in a certain way. We're trying to figure out what that way is. There's only one answer to our questions. We just have to figure out how to get to that answer. And from the social sciences, there's this much more nuanced sort of approach trying to understand how you get to those sorts of answers and recognizing that the answers are context dependent. And so there isn't necessarily one answer. It depends upon your viewpoint, depends upon the context, depends on the environment. And so this is a very old discussion, and I think it is a real split between the areas. But back on the original point, I guess I would argue that these three areas, that there's as much variation within any one of those areas than there almost is between them. And so I don't really see that the methodological differences really are unique. Are they really define these areas? We even do history, right? And so anybody who has to write a review article in science is essentially doing history. And it's not clear that we do it in any different way than historians do it.
And I would actually suggest that the differences that were articulated during the science wars are not as strong as a lot of people assume they are. So historians are empirically driven. We're deeply dedicated to an empirical method. We believe that there are things that are true and things that are not true. I think people who write literary theory feel the same way.
Yeah, I would agree that even within English, it's that distinction. I think it's coming out of the Sokol hoax, in the 90s, and that I think certainly was a moment where post-structuralist theory was encouraging a real kind of reassessment of what do we know of reality, but at the same time, I think if you took a snapshot of people doing literary criticism right now, I mean, you would not find a large number of us questioning the existence of an objective reality, although there still would be perhaps some questioning of how far we can know and assess that reality.
Well, I think the scientists are right with you there.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah, that's a big question for all of us. How far can we really know things?
Okay, well, let's direct our attention to the next slide, which, despite their differences of the three cultures, there is obviously overlap. We're suggesting at the point of scholarship. All three cultures, in fact, reside within a larger university culture in which we share a focus on scholarship, a question-based approach to the world in which we live. So is this where the three cultures come together at the point of scholarship and the university?
I think for me that's definitely the case. From my own perspective, I do research on the topic of eating disorders, and I think if we genuinely care about the questions that will inform our topics of research and scholarship, we have to look beyond our own disciplines, because the questions don't belong to one of these three cultures, and I definitely don't think the answers are going to fully be brought by any one of the three areas.
I might just add, under the rubric of scholarship, I would want to make sure we included the kind of work that my colleagues in creative writing do, which is certainly also a kind of exploration of human questions, but just through very different methods.
Okay, do we have any questions or comments from the audience at this point? Would you step to the mic, please? Thank you.
You've discussed methodologies, you've thrown that word around a lot, but you've not defined the distinctions in methodology between humanities and hard sciences. I think it would be worthwhile mentioning what you mean by methodologies and how they differ.
Thank you.
Ooh, how long do we have?
Yeah.
yeah.
25 words or less.
So a haiku, preferably.
A haiku.
How about the scientific method presents, it is not all. Is that from a
Very nice.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that would be for historians, that the scientific method is, we kind of sort of have an affiliation to it, but not completely. We're also very conscious of our own narrative possibilities and the data that we accumulate. So kind of the scientific method doesn't strictly map on to historical scholarship, very completely cleanly, but it's more than I think it does in literary theory.
Yeah, I mean, to give an example within a narrow field of English, you can think of different methods as different kind of tools in your toolbox. So I want to make sure my students, for example, know how to do close reading. I want to make sure that they know how to do a historicist analysis. I want to make sure that they're familiar with the different methods of literary theory, whether it be Marxist or feminist or, what have you, and be able to understand that if you're pulling a term from one of those methods, you're also pulling a whole basket load of assumptions about how the world works and how literature works. And then there are people like Franco Moretti, who uses statistics to look at how many novels were published in 1837, most of which are now lost to us. Or Dan Cohen, the historian, who just got a Google grant to examine in Google Books how many times the word, empire appears in literature written in English in Google Books in 1837, right? So there are a vast range of different tools, and I think one of the hardest things for us is knowing when it's appropriate to use a particular tool for a particular context. And sometimes if you get a little too far outside that context, I mean, this has been something people said about Franco Moretti, for example, is it really still English? You know, so I think, you know, here's where methodology and disciplinary work really line up with one another.
Yeah, and I think we have the same range of methodologies and maybe even some of the exact same methodologies in my field. And so I agree, there's just this huge range of methodologies. It's very hard to, there's so much overlap between them, it's really hard to kind of first even define them because what you want to call methodology is so broad. But it's so broad within each area that I think it's hard to actually say where they really differ a lot. It's not that they don't. Maybe some generalizations could be made, but you know, other than kind of scientific method sort of differences, we may more strictly follow those in science. It's hard to say what else might be different.
My guess is that you would probably be able to be more aware of what the methodologies were that defined your discipline, maybe not within the broad culture of natural sciences, social sciences, or humanities, but maybe even more at a departmental level when it comes time for hiring. I mean, one of the things that I've seen come up in faculty searches is you're reviewing applications, you're looking at VITAs, you're looking at publications, and you develop a sense of which applicants are kind of reaching to apply for the position in your department. You know, because it's a tough job market and people need jobs, and which really belongs sort of squarely to what you see as being your discipline or group. I do think it's hard to come up with some general statement that provides a clear answer to it. It's one of those things I think that comes up when you get down into the specifics.
One other thing to think about might be different methodologies have a different idea of what counts as evidence. And I ran across this. I used to teach in a department of history and literature and would have discussions a lot with the guy I was teaching with, the co-teacher who was a historian. And, you know, when I do a close reading, I find things in the text and I make the case for that meaning something. And he would want a different kind of evidence before he was convinced. So, you know, he wanted the smoking gun, and I was, you know, maybe more happy with the nuanced reference.
Yeah. I might add that, and this is not clearly worked out in my own head by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there's some kind of difference about approaching the world through questions and approaching the world or what you're confronted with through kind of listening to what is presented to you. And I think that my guess is that there's a range across methodologies about that, but you know, like historians, often what we do is we kind of have some vague sense that we're interested in something, and then we gather a lot of stuff and kind of mess around with it and see what happens. And it's kind of question-based, but it's also almost experiential-based in that we just sort of see what comes out of the documents.
It's like you're stirring up the pond to see what's going to come to the surface.
And I don't want to I don't want to claim that's not what scientists do. But when I see the quote about, you know, we all have a question-based approach to the world, that doesn't exactly capture. I mean, it sort of captures, but not exactly what I feel like I'm doing when I almost feel like I'm talking to dead people sometimes in my work, right? And they're telling me what I should be writing. I know it sounds kind of weird, right? But you get to know people really well, even though they've been dead for 200 years.
So you're Bruce Willis, yeah. So I have had a lot of conversations with historians in ecology recently, and I have to relate one small story in that I wrote a review paper on something called the resource ratio hypothesis, which I'm sure you all know a lot about. And to do it as a scientist, what we did is we got together a group of people, and we read all, 2011 papers on the resource ratio hypothesis. They've been published since the key article was published in 1979. And then we put those papers into categories, right? We're scientists. We put things into boxes, and we make them numbers. And we find out how many people tested it in this habitat or this habitat, how many the hypothesis makes particular predictions, which predictions they tested, and we get all these sort of detail. And so I go to these historians of science, and I say, well, how would you have done this? Because it's just a history. That's all we're really doing. A review paper of a concept like that is really just writing a history of that concept. And they said, well, what they'd do is they'd read a bunch of papers in that area, kind of the key papers that everybody cites, and then they'd kind of come up with some sort of story for it. And then they would kind of align the rest of the papers to match that story. And it is a very different sort of perspective. But it's hard to kind of say why. I mean, I would say that my way's better, and they would say their way's better, but because I think I'm kind of looking for patterns more, and they're looking more at processes, maybe.
Well, we're looking for patterns too. They're just different kinds of patterns, I think.
Okay, I'm going to move along a little bit here. Fascinating discussion on how do we define methods in the different cultures. And another thing that comes up is some other terms that require definition. In the three visiting speakers' presentations, there were different approaches talked about for scholarly interactions among the three cultures. One mode is to have one scholar utilizing the skills drawn from two or more disciplines to address a particular question. So here the scholar must be versed in more than one discipline, a challenge. A second approach is to have a team of scholars, each maintaining his or her own academic specialty, organized around a specific question. It turns out that there's some bit of confusion on terminology in trying to define these two modes, and these terms are mentioned a lot in this kind of discussion. And it turns out that our invited speakers used different terms for these two modes, and I mean, they did not have a consistent terminology to define these two modes, and it turns out that members of our panel have different definitions, and I won't speak for the panelists, but it would seem to be a consensus, particularly among our visiting speakers, that this is the most fruitful approach, to have the team approach, because it's so difficult for any one scholar to master two or more subject areas. Not impossible, but it certainly is difficult. And actually, for most of the series, we ended up calling this transdisciplinary, but that would just be sort of in-house. That was our term for it, and it would not necessarily be universal. So rather than to get into too much of a debate over which term is appropriate, it might be best to ask, do you agree that for most research, perhaps the team approach is the better method to use rather than the individual scholar trying to master more than one discipline? It obviously depends on the project, I guess, but any proponents of the team approach?
Should we raise our hand? I'm a proponent of the team approach.
Okay.
I think I agree with you. It depends upon the question.
Right.
And the desired outcome.
So I'm going to take as a premise that the question is something that would benefit from expertise from more than one discipline. And if I take that as the premise of the question, I would be an advocate for a team of scholars rather than one person trying to master multiple disciplines.
I would just want to add, I'm certainly somebody who agrees that it's very difficult for one scholar to really master two disciplines. It's hard to, for example, write a book that is going to be equally useful to literary scholars and to historians, let alone literary scholars and biologists, right? But that doesn't mean that, certainly in English is kind of notorious for hijacking or poaching bits and pieces from other disciplines, and sometimes in ways that are very surprising to the originary disciplines. I think, psychology is a great example where we still believe in Freud, and I think probably, most contemporary psychologists.
I present it as a metaphor when I talk about it. I usually say, I don't want you to think about these things literally. I want you to think about these things metaphorically.
Yeah, so it's going both ways.
Yeah. I did want to point out that I think that the team of scholars approach does require that we as individual scholars have an awareness and appreciation of disciplines other than our own, because how do you know who to approach to help you with a research question, or even how to frame the research question, or who else should be on your team if you remain very narrowly focused on your approach, your methods, your view of the world. So there's got to be a little bit of that first approach to even make the second approach successful.
And I would say that I spent a lot of time in my office by myself writing my book.
That's what historians do.
That's what historians do. I kind of like it because, I get to stuff different things in my head, and then like weird stuff happens, and I get new ideas, And that process, when I try to have that process happen in teams, it can be really awesome because people have other weird stuff that I never thought of in their heads. But it can also be fraught with like pain and suffering, because we get mad at each other, and so one thing I'd say with the team of scholars stuff, it's, in my view at least, it's kind of really, really important to be nice and be generous with each other, kind of intellectually, but also socially, epistemologically generous. I don't understand your methods, and part of me thinks they're a bunch of baloney, but I'm going to kind of bracket my concerns so we can work together. But also just, really a commitment to being nice and being forthright about what it is we're doing. I think that actually goes a long, long way. And I think the interpersonal stuff can actually be a significant barrier that isn't articulated clearly enough.
One other issue that I think is important just to acknowledge is in English, for example, collaborative work, the kind of team-based work that we notice on the right-hand side of the slide, is still not fully recognized for promotion and tenure, and junior scholars are often counseled not to engage in a lot of collaborative work until after they have tenure, because for us the single author monograph is still, the lingua franca of scholarly achievement.
It's also interesting there are still strong differences between fields, and you probably all experience the same thing, but Pam's point about all of us needing to keep an open mind to really do the best work, to see what other areas may give us new skills in, I think is really important. But if I look at a lot of molecular biology right now, or a lot of phylogenetics, these tend to be fields where these single individuals run labs, and they don't talk to other labs, and they work very narrowly, and they keep secrets. I mean, they're very concerned sometimes about allowing stuff out of their lab, because they're developing techniques in these rapidly developing fields, and they're really concerned about losing those ideas, and so they necessarily don't communicate a whole lot. I'm in ecology and evolution. We're a slower field. We're less worried about somebody. We hope somebody comes and steals our ideas. It might mean they're worth something. And so we don't mind at all. We tend to have a lot more interaction, a lot more discourse. And I know, for example, I've worked some with the philosophy group here, and I've always found it very interesting that they will have these kind of regular meetings where a bunch of people are writing books, and they'll all read parts of their books to each other, and they'll have a couple of days where they just interact with each other, exchanging ideas. And so it's kind of, there's some real differences within disciplines in subject areas about how interactive they are. It's kind of odd.
We have one question from the audience. Thank you.
I'm really interested to see if anyone can point to a committee or something that they've done that is in that mode of working together on a question. Even though we talk about this, it's all talk. Nobody's done it, and I'm really curious, how can a university encourage that? And one, they have to give time and money towards it, and promotion. They have to say, we're going to take this and we want to do this, and we're going to promote people who do this.
So I don't know
Thank
if
you.
it would be useful to move forward in the talk, because we did include a slide that, towards the end of the talk, we talk about strategies for implementing a three-culture dialogue at Florida State University. So we could either skip forward to that point in the talk, or we could each talk about some of the interdisciplinary things that we've been involved in that at least involve two of the cultures. I don't know what the preference would be.
I think we can deal with it when we get to that point, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Let's move on to the third, basically the third segment of our discussion, a section on opportunities for cross-cultural contributions. Dr. Neil Lane, our third speaker, gave the following quote with one little addition on our panelist's part. We have huge problems. Okay, this is about policy. We have huge problems in the way we deal with science and technology policy, and also education policy. in this country. Scholars from all three cultures need to take a close look at the current situation and come up with suggestions. So he's calling for this cross-cultural interaction of the three cultures. And do you agree that that approach is most beneficial, perhaps, in dealing with these large questions such as policy, to have the three cultures try to unite or communicate with each other? Is that a good approach to use?
I can't let that slide go by without putting in a plug for what I do. My name is Earl Clay. I'm the chairperson called director of the Askew School of Public Administration and Policy. And all three of those circles just naturally overlap with everything we do. Currently, we have bachelor's students in our master's degree program with a bachelor's degree in psychology, English, and biology. Our students will go on to deal with all of these, and I'm looking at a good colleague who's from urban and regional planning who can say the very same things. We deal with policy all the time. We also deal with the application, as you do, of knowledge in ways that affect people's lives. Therefore, ethics, we have to look at the behavioral sciences and the humanities, particularly philosophy, as it relates to questions of integrity. We also look at fiction for matters related to that, and teaching leadership, topics like that, we use fiction all the time. On the other hand, we're preparing people to be policy analysts. I used to be one before I became an academic. We try to teach our students to read natural science reports. Some of them have bachelor's degrees, others don't. Mine is in social sciences, but when I was an analyst for a legislature, I had to read things related to air quality, water quality, and many other topics, behavioral, mental health topics, and so on. So policy is an area. There are many places on our campus, education and other colleges as well, that deal with policy. Where policy is really being dealt with, you're finding those three circles overlapping quite naturally. And the people who are doing it are typically trained in a multidisciplinary way. Teams of people from different areas are great. They are very necessary in many places. I would suggest you probably need a facilitator from one of the more integrative disciplines who already is drawing from the multiple ones.
Okay, thank you for that excellent example from the policy arena. Do our panelists have anything to add to that, or anyone else in the audience? Okay, well, another area of potential cross-cultural contributions is, of course, in the area of education. Again, Dr. Neil Lane spoke about this scientific illiteracy in our culture. And his quote is, "The cultural divides among faculty carry over to the students who are the future leaders. If we on the faculty don't understand one another, recognize the value of one another's research and scholarship, and the importance of having a diversity of perspectives," and we added, "and approaches," then what chance do our students have? If we are not working together on some of the large problems that humanity faces, the loss is far more than intellectual. So my question is, as professors, what are our responsibilities to our students in this area?
One thing I would suggest is just to remember the importance of allowing students or encouraging students to take classes from across all of the cultures, and ideally to be taking them at the same time, so that that the kind of serendipity effect of having aspects of one course sort of influence the way you understand things in another course can happen. And I think too often these days there's a notion of a university degree as a kind of pre-professional certification. And as a proud member of the humanities, I guess I don't agree with that. And I think that part of what we need to be doing in a university is exposing our students to a range of ideas and methods across a lot of disciplines, and kind of allowing them to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I was moved a lot by Lane's talk in general. But it just made me think that this old concept of liberal arts program is slowly being lost, and it concerns me because that was its original design, and still we still have largely at Florida State. I mean, our biology majors have to take a variety of courses across the disciplines, and that's true in most departments. And so it's already built into our programs. We've always realized it was important. What I'm worried about is losing it, not gaining it at this point.
Yeah, and you know, I teach in the medical school, which is a professional degree, and my basic job is to help the medical students learn how to do their job, learn how to do what they want to do well, right? I want to help train good physicians. But it's, you know, the humanities have a tremendous role to play in that process. And it's to the great credit of the medical school that, you know, we recognize that the institution recognizes that, and recognizes that being a physician is more than being kind of scientific in a narrow sense. But, and I think that you can say that about all professions, right? I don't think that the professions are something that are exempt from the possibilities of the humanities. You know, if you're training to be an architect, it helps to know things about beauty and, you know, et cetera, right? So the loss of liberal arts, I think, impacts the training of scientists and engineers and other kinds of so-called technical fields in ways that aren't often appreciated.
And are there ways that you think that courses required in the sciences would be important to the training of scholars in English and history and other disciplines? And
Oh,
if so, in what
absolutely.
ways
I mean,
do
well,
you value that?
I mean, first of all, because we don't want to be producing a generation of citizens who are scientifically illiterate and mathematically illiterate, right? Especially given the problems facing this country. But also, just it seems as though, you know, one of the major things we do in English, it's not just that we're analyzing fiction and poetry, but we're also, as part of the kind of ancient art of rhetoric, we're analyzing argument. And of course, that's something that can apply across a number of disciplines, but being exposed to mathematical proofs or scientific arguments, that's all going to stretch and strengthen our students' ability to understand and kind of schematize the arguments that they find elsewhere. So,
yeah, and let me just say something that I think graduate training in the humanities doesn't do well, and that is teaching the importance of understanding kind of technical debates within sciences themselves. Right, so if I'm writing about the history of pharmacology, and you know, a lot of historians will say, well, I don't actually need to know very much about pharmacology, because that's not what historians do, and I think that's actually a failing in a certain way. So actually, at least in the history of science and medicine and other kinds of fields like that, I think it is important that historians start exposing graduate students to scientists and the kinds of things that scientists do.
I think we also forget that learning more about other fields helps you better understand what your own field is. And so I taught a class in art and ecology once, which was a very strange class, but it was a lot of fun. And one of my colleagues, Don Levitan, came up with this great project for it that he does with his students. And so he has some of these students are artists, some are in biology. And he has the students go out in the intertidal or something and pick up something like a starfish. They can pick up any item. And they've got to draw it once as a scientific illustration and once as a piece of art. And then think about what they were doing different. And I think it allows the scientists to better appreciate what they do, as well as kind of maybe trying to understand what artists are trying to do at the same. Well, you have the converse as well. The artists get a better idea of how their own work is differing from just a strict scientific interpretation of something. So I think that this sort of integration across areas is very important.
Keep talking, we lost our slides.
Oh.
Well, we're college professors.
We have somebody
we can
here. We
talk
have somebody
forever.
who has a question. Yeah, run to a mic.
If you will, I want to go back to that idea about whether there's any value in individuals developing interdisciplinary approaches and skills. And of course, I am such a person, so I'm speaking for myself here. And I know it has its costs. because if you're grounded in the discipline and you're trying to get promoted in disciplines, it's going to cost you. I happen to be in a field that's interdisciplinary, but I'm publishing in disciplinary journals, for example. But and this is what made me think of it, is I span the social sciences and public health. Whenever I take on what to me is a new outcome variable, it's a health, I do my homework. And when I did asthma, I went to public health conferences and I met people with asthma, and I read all the epidemiology of asthma so that I wouldn't look like a fool when I was, right? And it's real interesting to me because I saw a college friend who's an award-winning novelist this summer. And we had long talks, and she spent 6 years on her last novel because she had to learn all about brain science as well as all about Cambodian refugees because of the topic she was taking on, and she knew she couldn't make mistakes. There couldn't be things in there that were wrong scientifically. And so I think we can do that. It requires, we have to stretch, we have to be humble. I've gotten some rejections in disciplinary journals, and I was pretty sure it's because I was using the wrong jargon. But, I think there's a place for that. Not everybody. So just wondering what you think about that.
Well, I think your point is excellent to the extent that when Bob invited us to do it, he selected one person from the humanities, one person from the natural sciences, and then found himself clearly stuck with not being able to find one person from the social sciences, and instead introduced Joe as bridging humanities and social sciences and me as bridging social sciences and natural sciences. And I don't disagree. I actually don't disagree with that characterization. I think that there is probably more to the idea that we develop expertise that sort of transcend traditional boundaries than we gave credit to. At the same time, I will say that in my own research, so I'm just going to give a concrete example because it's very hard to do these things generally. I've put in a proposal in which I want to understand if the genes that confer risk for eating disorders, if the effect of those genes are influenced by the hormonal environment in which they function as an epigenetic effect, and if this could in any way contribute to what we already see as gender and developmental differences in the epidemiology and longitudinal course of eating disorders. So I have to know something about the way genes function. I need to know that they get regulated by ovarian hormones. I need to know these things, right? At the same time, I'm not going to put in a proposal without a geneticist on my team, because at the end of the day, I don't have a PhD in multiple fields. In fact, I know how to do statistics. I also have a statistician on my proposal too, because there's only so much that I can do and do well. And again, if I care about the answer to the question, if I care about getting it done and getting it done well, then I want the best expertise coming to the table on that. But I need to know about these different things in order to bring those people together.
Okay, we need another circle called technology. Our first lecture started out with technical problems, and we seem to be ending with them. But just to bring things further along here, another opportunity for cross-cultural contributions. Dr. Elaine Eklund made the statement that traction on large questions that humanity faces, we can get that by cultivating a truly imaginative attitude about what disciplinary scholarship might become. So I think that's very important, to be able to use our imaginations to dream about how these different cultures could come together. And we just, on the slides here, we just put several examples. We could study religion through religious studies, anthropology, neuroscience, power and inequality. This one seems very diverse, but I think we could be imaginative and figure out how to put these three together: English, sociology, and math. Climate change, history, economics, and climatology. And picking up on the climate change, here's an example of the three cultures overlapping. The humanities here with historical studies of the problem, the natural sciences with the physical parameters, defining the problem physically, and then some contributions from the social sciences, perhaps economics. And here's the common ground in between. And as someone in earth, ocean, and atmospheric sciences, I would say clearly the solution to climate change is not just a scientific problem, but we definitely need input from all three of these spheres, meeting here at the point of scholarship. Anyone want to comment on this idea of being truly imaginative? Is that really an important attitude to have as we try to solve these problems? Imagination.
Well, how could we disagree?
I agree.
Well, maybe I could point to maybe one of the tensions is maybe between specialization. I mean, there may, and I'm not saying this for sure, but there may be a tension between specialization and synthesis or imagination. I mean, I think there may not be. It's a provocative statement, but there's something about becoming more and more specialized that maybe shuts off the potential to ask different kinds of questions. And that's one of my concerns about the idea that teams of scholars who are experts in their field getting together and working towards is that, you know, I think it's useful or maybe even important to protect the ability of people to muck around and stuff and come up with new ideas through that process. So I would actually argue for protecting the ability to make mistakes and having errors be okay. Like it's okay to, you know, like I'm protecting the idea that it won't threaten my ability to get tenure if I make a really bad mistake in public. You know, I mean, there's a kind of creativity that I think can get shut off by specialization, linking it to outcomes, and so on.
I guess I disagree. I think they're pretty orthogonal to each other. I don't see that becoming more and more narrow. I think, you know, in National Science Foundation, I know, for example, it has approximately 25% of their grants now are interdisciplinary in some way. And so there's a big emphasis to do that. I'm one of these people who actually objects and thinks maybe we should think about what questions are good for interdisciplinary and what aren't, which really should be more narrowly addressed. And so, you know, I think there are questions at which some people really have to focus on and work very narrowly within a single field, and they don't need to work in an interdisciplinary way. And I think in doing that, I think they can be just as imaginative as groups working together on and so I guess I don't see them as one limits the other in any way.
And
but
I don't disagree with you on that.
I would like to maybe just add an example to illustrate the way I like to think about this, which is currently I'm working on the 19th century writing on the microscope in England. And the Victorians were just fascinated by this notion that when you look through a microscope for them, which was because of technological improvements, it was newly kind of reliable and affordable during this period, that the smaller you got, the bigger the universe seemed to them. This notion that, you know, the vastness of the very small. It's as though you're going down farther and deeper, the higher the magnification. And in fact, it seems like a good metaphor for the way I find when I'm starting to work on a topic, the more I focus specifically on that topic and the deeper I become, I guess, specialized in that topic, the more it opens up for me and starts to produce these connections and widening out. I mean, there is a kind of effect of the vastness of the very narrow.
Okay, well, we're running out of time. So last slide. You know, what can we do, if anything, at FSU to make for a better communication across cultures? These are some suggestions that came up basically from visiting speakers, from the panelists, from myself and others who've entered into this discussion. These are possibilities for FSU. There are opportunities here for faculty and opportunities for students. So you can read the list, but seed money for transdisciplinary research, transdisciplinary centers and institutes with tenure-earning lines, courses and seminars, a faculty group to study this further. I mean, we've sort of made a start here in the faculty luncheon series, but obviously much more could be done on this. A program for our students, something that would be particularly interesting to me would be a Science and Humanities Scholars Program within the undergraduate curriculum. And then physical space and events to promote interaction among faculty of various departments and units. Which of these strategies, if any, would you like to see implemented at FSU? Which might be possible here? And for any one of these, how might we proceed toward implementation? In 5 minutes. And I'll throw this open to the audience and the panelists. Which, if any, of these appeal to you and or seem possible here? Okay, yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Micah Vandergrift. I'm with University Libraries. To kind of piggyback off of this, I'm wondering what role the library can play in this sort of thing. For those of you that don't know, we've recently hired a Dean of Digital Scholarship, and I've actually been hired very recently also as a Scholarly Communications Librarian, brand new line that we're opening up here. So this is the sort of thing that we want to help you all explore. So I'm wondering if you could speak to how we might do this with you.
Tom?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the library helps all the time in various ways. I'm not sure how they could take a lead in this other than they've always had a great support role. I think that we already have institutes, as was eloquently shown, in policy areas that are necessarily interdisciplinary and have been very important and are long-standing at Florida State. I think maybe what's needed now is some imagination into other directions in which there might be productive interdisciplinary research. The one that we talked about a little bit briefly is, there's a new, of the President's Big Ideas program. So one of his big ideas is a Pan-American program to try to get Gulf of California, Caribbean countries together to address social, political, environmental issues. Everything from fisheries to land use to global warming to all sorts of stuff would be perhaps under one group, bringing people together from different countries and different institutes, which is clearly interdisciplinary. They're throwing some money at it and may turn out to be very interesting. I guess there's an open house for it on Thursday. I can put in a plug. But I think it's that type of imagination maybe we need to just think broadly about what things we could do, where interdisciplinary would be really useful is what we need to think about now.
Others?
Well, I know within the Department of Psychology we have cross-area courses, and those are courses because in the Department of Psychology we have the clinical area, that's what I'm in. We have neuroscience, we have social psychology, developmental, cognitive. Gosh, I hope that's all of them. I don't feel bad if that isn't. But we would have faculty from 2 of those different areas teach a course together, and it would be a lot of fun, I think, to do a course with somebody who is outside of the Department of Psychology and even outside of sort of my comfort zone on a topic, because I feel like I would learn a lot from doing that. So that could, I mean, as a faculty member, I think that is interesting.
Yes, please.
I'm Peggy Wright-Cleveland with the Office of Faculty Recognition, and I would say that there is a national grant for developing that kind of multidisciplinary course that I can talk to faculty members about, and that is the push for it. And the Council for Research and Creativity on campus currently offers a multidisciplinary grant. I mean, it's small, but it is there, and it's a good starting point. So we at least have those 2 things that provide some funding.
Thank you.
Along the same lines, NSF has a Science and Society program, and their Science and Society program has funded us. We've done some interdisciplinary work between philosophy, history, and biology. So there are lots of other sources. So it's a good point. There's money for it, too. Yeah.
Is there interest in some sort of faculty research group or physical space for faculty to get together just in a more informal setting?
I'm a big proponent of hanging out, and getting stuff done through hanging out and having fun, but it's hard to make it happen, I mean, it's just hard to make it happen because we're all so busy and we all have lives that go in 10 million directions, right? So one of the challenges, it seems to me, is how do we carve out not only physical space but time to do things that may or may not work.
right?
Or may or may not count. I mean,
Or may or may not count. And, yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to make a point here, if we could.
Sure.
I like this. I like this last idea a lot, but I think one thing that you haven't mentioned here is that many of these group plan kind of things is not just within the university. I mean, in this century, when we do something interdisciplinary, we reach out on internet to friends all over the world. I mean, not just in this university. But at the American Geophysical Union, we started something many years ago which we thought was very good. It's something called the Chapman meetings. That is, where you get a group of people focused at a meeting, you sort of try to separate them from the world for a week or 3 days, 4 days, something like that. And so it's this last point I'm making is that if you can group people together, focusing on a given topic or group of topics, that this is very productive.
Okay, thank you. In the audience, I don't want to particularly call on people, but we did have a luncheon back in the summer. Dr. Karen Laughlin got together the Director of Undergraduate Research, the Honors Program, Sandra Lewis from Faculty Senate. Would you care to make any comments about how some of this might be taken up in some of the undergraduate structures or Faculty Senate?
I'll just say one thing from the curriculum standpoint, is that we talk a lot about trying to hang on to our liberal arts tradition at the university. And I think, and you've also alluded to this tremendous pressure we're getting about education being a vocational training. And I think that in some ways we as faculty need to keep thinking about how we can continue to remind our students about the value of the liberal arts education and tradition that they're receiving in every course that we teach, reminding them about what they're gaining that's part of building that foundation, and that yes, we're talking about our own particular disciplines, but these are the assumptions of our discipline. You know, we don't have to be experts in the other disciplines, but I do think that often we lose that, and that especially with this generation of students, the more we can overtly make those connections from time to time, the richer the educational experience is for our students, and the more we reinforce that sense of the culture that we all value, but sometimes I think don't articulate.
Okay, thank you. Well, does anyone else have a comment, question? We're just about out of time. I would like to thank our panelists for a tremendous discussion, I think. And Ken Goldsby, I believe, has an announcement about the series, the faculty luncheon series in the spring.
I'm going to be very brief because I know it's quite late, but Bob did ask me to say something about next semester's series. In 2006, Dennis Moore put together a series for the faculty luncheon series where he asked people who would receive the Distinguished Teaching Award. And I'm going to get over here because these robotic cyclopses are freaking me out. Don't worry, they'll edit that out. They asked us to put together a series of people who received the university's Distinguished Teaching Award. And the broad topic here was why we teach. And it was very interesting, a lot of different perspectives. That was in 2006. That was only 5 years ago. But the group that puts together these programs thought it might be a nice time to do that again. Now, again, I know it's late, but I'm going to read one paragraph to you because I'm kind of proud of it, and it'll be a test of tenure, because I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to say some of these things. I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to say, okay, you're kidding. You're kidding. Big brother. All right, 2006. That was only 5 years ago, but a lot has changed since then. The university's budget has dropped every year. We have a new governor with strong ideas about what higher education should look like in the state of Florida. As part of our accreditation procedure, we are told to create learning outcomes that can never be reached. Otherwise, we cannot show yearly that we make progress. By the way, I call this the Zeno's paradox approach to evaluation. We read about a brain drain in the university system that begs the question, why am I still here? And just about the only thing that has stayed constant in the past 5 years is the yearly pay increases that the university faculty and staff receive. That has stayed constant at zero. You know, it is the best job in the world because we vote with our feet. We're still here. Who would trade places with anybody and give up working with students in their laboratories or their classrooms or whatever? But this might be a good time to remind ourselves why it is we still teach, why we're still doing that. So the series will start with, and our team of Bobs have helped tremendously with this. They really have done all the heavy lifting. Our first speaker in January will be our new provost, and she'll really set the tone for this meeting. Joe Quadagna has agreed to speak in the series, and I brought two versions of this handout. I'm just going to pick one up on the way out if you're interested. The green one is the program that I think will exist, but I'm still waiting for one person to confirm. So it's kind of like the Matrix. Do you take the red pill or do you take the blue pill? Well, I've actually removed the person who I think will be our first speaker, just because that's not confirmed right now. But if you're interested, please grab a copy on your way out. Well, hope you'll be here next semester for this series. It should be very stimulating. Our final speaker will be Dennis Moore. When Dennis put together this series in 2006, he excluded himself, although he was certainly qualified to speak in it. So I think this is our chance to hear from Dennis, someone who really has demonstrated in so many ways how much he cares about this educational enterprise, why we still teach. And so I hope you'll join us now.
And if anyone wants to make reservations for next semester so that it's easier to bypass in January, I'll take your names.
And quickly, some thank yous. Remind everyone, I mentioned this, the first luncheon that President Barron funded the visiting speakers and the cost of the webcast. Thanks always to Bruce Chapman and the PUC for hosting these events. There's a tremendous amount of work in setting up, and then after we all leave, bringing it back down. So thank you, Bruce, to you and your organization. WFSU TV for the TV coverage and the webcasts. Beverly Yerg for doing such a great job of handling the reservations and taking the money. And finally to Walter Moore for working with Aramark and delivering the food. I did that one semester, and I know that's a very laborious task. So, and thanks to all of you for coming. I know many of you have been here for all the 4 luncheons, and thank you for your support and your interest. Have a great break.